to get on here and engage with all of you. This is just going to be a quick evening check-in. I have work in the morning, as do many of you. Plus, it is late. It is Sunday evening. However, let's be real. Let's be real. Sometimes I do a quick check-in, and you all come up with so many super chats, I end up going for 2 or 3 hours. So, hey, if you want to keep it rolling, just keep those super chats rolling in, and I'll keep answering your questions. But if not, this will just be a quick check-in. I will check in with you all, give you a few updates on things going on in the world, some quick news events, and we'll do our roll call, and then I'll answer your super chat questions. Then we'll be done. I'm thinking like an hour tonight, but last time I planned to do just an hour. We ended up going for quite some time. So welcome. Glad you're here. As always, a pleasure to be with you. Hit the like button. Hit the notifications bell. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. Hit the subscribe button to make sure you're subscribed. On top of that, you would post this on Reddit. That would be a smart move. If you would post this on Twitter, that would be a smart move. Jimmy Dore, I was actually going to reference that, but I'll do it in the Q&A. Jimmy Dore and his little spat with AOC. We'll talk about that. Antifa and BLM. Corporatized. Very good questions to start us off with. But yes, I'll just update you quickly on a few things, and then from there, I'll answer I'll do the roll call, and then I'll answer your super chat questions. So it's always fun to interact with you all, and we'll just talk about a few quick things that are in my very short opening remarks. First of all, right, you all know that I'm very interested in the oil markets. I was invited to Brazil in 2016 by the major labor federation, the Trade Union Center of Brazil, the CSB. They had me give a presentation called Oil and the Capitalist Crisis. That book has been published in both Portuguese and in English. It's available. My presentation to the CSB, my 2-hour speech is on the internet. You can watch it. I spoke to many thousands of oil workers and other workers in Brazil about how the U.S. government was trying to manipulate the oil prices. I talked about the role of the big super major oil companies and how oil plays a role in global politics. I talked about all of that. Well, I wanted to give you all an interesting update. So I tend to read the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal is now at this point owned by Rupert Murdoch. It's part of News Corporation. It's Fox. But they tend to give you the more straightforward party line of imperialism. They don't try to... folks, I hate the New York Times. I absolutely hate the New York Times. The New York Times never tells me straightforward. It's a mainstream news outlet. It's a mainstream media outlet. But the New York Times never gives me exactly what I want from a mainstream media outlet. When I turn on CNN, when I turn on MSNBC, when I turn on Fox, when I open the New York Times, when I open the Wall Street Journal, what I'm looking for from a mainstream media outlet is the unfiltered American party line. Luxury goods. Does the U.S. president have the authority to nationalize an entire industry? Authority to national. These are all good questions. Folks, the New York Times is written for college professors and intellectuals and liberals. And it is written in this very careful way to address your concerns, to make you feel like you're a smart person because you read it, like you're part of an elite club of people who read the New York Times. They tend to go into depth, feature pieces, descriptions. The New York Times, I find it to be a really obnoxious publication. Never have I once opened the New York Times and been satisfied with what I got. Every time I open the New York Times, I get a lot of long, rambly articles trying to very subtly convince me of things, leave me in a state of ambiguity, going, That's not why USSR prevented collapse. That is not why. It's not why I open a mainstream media outlet. If I'm turning on CNN, if I'm opening the Wall Street Journal, I'm doing it because I want to know what the ruling class wants me to believe. I want to know the straight up, unfiltered American imperialist party line. This is what you're supposed to think. That's it. I'm not looking for you to try and convince me otherwise. I'm not looking for you to entertain the possibility that it could possibly be wrong, but you know what? It probably isn't. I'm not looking for ideological reflections and literary comparisons. I'm just looking, when I open a mainstream media outlet, for them to tell me what I'm supposed to think, right? Mainstream media is the voice of the ruling class. And when I open a mainstream media outlet, I'm looking for the unfiltered, this is what you're supposed to think, voice of the ruling class. The New York Times is way too self-indulgent, to actually do that. Wall Street Journal, on the other hand, Murdoch Press, it leans a little bit close to Trump, but it's been pretty anti-Trump. It's been pretty critical of Trump, right? Like Fox News. They're not fully in the Trump camp. They're in the Republican camp. They're in the neocon camp. They're not really in the Trump camp. Plus, they tend to cover economic news. It is, after all, the Wall Street Journal. I mean, the business reporting, etc., tends to be very, very good. Future of Russia. So, because of that, I tend to read the Wall Street Journal. And the weekend edition of the Wall Street Journal I find to be much, much better because it tends to report on trends, right? The weekend issue, it's out for 2 days. It's Saturday and Sunday. It has the Weekend Review, which is like their weekend magazine. So when I read the Wall Street Journal, not only am I getting trends, in the weekend edition, I'm also getting economic reporting. And so that's why, as somebody who follows the oil markets, I found this particular article in the business section, the trade section of the weekend Wall Street Journal, to be very interesting. The dicey economics of oil, right? And now I have talked a lot in my writing about the 4 super major oil companies that dominate the global oil markets: BP, Chevron, ExxonMobil, and Royal Dutch Shell. Those 4 oil companies, they are based in Britain and London and in New York City and on Wall Street, right? And those 4 entities are such a major player in the global economy, it's not funny. I mean, those are the forces that run the world. Big banks are all tied in with them. Skippy the bear. All right. And big banks are all tied in with them, that's basically that's probably the most powerful force. ML view of religion. It's probably the most powerful force economically in the world is the corporations and banks surrounding the 4 super majors. They call them the super major oil companies. So, at this point, it was very interesting that the Wall Street Journal ran an article. Oh, my goodness, Cleveland Indians announced it will change its name. I did not know that. There you go. Wow. Cleveland Indians change name. All right. Great. Keep those super chats rolling in. DPRK Misconceptions. Oh, thank you for the super chat. Lumpia Logic. DPRK Misconceptions. Very good. Very good. Alrighty. So this is what the Wall Street Journal says. Quote, the biggest oil companies increasingly disagree about what the future holds. ExxonMobil Corporation, that's the Rockefellers, mind you. That's like Standard Oil. It's the modern inheritor of Standard Oil. ExxonMobil, the biggest oil company in the entire world. ExxonMobil continues to invest in increasing oil production and says it believes oil demand will increase for years to come. BP, British Petroleum, That's HSBC Bank. Right? By contrast, believes demand may already have peaked and plans to reduce its oil and gas production by 40% over the next decade as it pivots toward green energy. What makes the situation even more challenging for investors? Why WSJ over the Financial Times? Okay, great. I'll address it. Now, more challenging for investors as new questions about the direction of oil prices, this is important. I'm going to start this paragraph again because this is the important part. What makes the situation even more challenging for investors are new questions about the direction of the oil prices, which no longer follow the fairly predictable cycle of boom and bust that governed the industry for the past centuries, right? It used to be the oil markets had a pretty stable boom-bust cycle. There'd be, lots of oil and the price would be rising, then there'd be too much oil, right? Overproduction, and then the price, then people would not be buying it, right? And this is how these things go. Prices traditionally fell when supply exceeded demand and rose when reduced investment in new drilling resulted in shortages. As I just said, right? Boom-bust cycle, supply and demand, pretty basic economics. In the past decade, America's widespread adoption of hydraulic fracking disrupted that historical pattern, resulting in a flood of new oil that could be produced quickly. That tamped down price spikes and eroded profits. So because of the United States of America and because of fracking, the oil markets are now rather unpredictable. There is now a wild card in the oil markets, which is the frackers, the fracking companies. And it's also, let's add, will the U.S. need to collapse first in order to go to socialism? First, before going to socialism. Fracking was a huge game changer in the international oil markets. It was just a huge, huge game changer. Huge game changer. The reason being that the four super majors no longer had a clear monopoly within the United States, and the United States shot up to being the top oil-producing country in the world, the top natural gas-producing country in the world, right? Before that, the United States had been behind the Soviet Union, behind Russia, but it was because of hydraulic fracking, and this happened under Obama, by the way. Donald Trump makes it sound like he did it himself. We are now the biggest oil producer in the world, bigger than Russia, bigger than Saudi Arabia. Well, yeah, that happened under Obama, but under Obama, as hydraulic fracking started to rapidly expand, the United States suddenly became the biggest energy producer in the world. And all these little fracking companies, like Devon Energy, for example, all these little fracking companies, they started to be a wild card in the international oil markets because you could not predict the rise and fall of the price of oil like you once could because of the fact that what the frackers did not necessarily line up with what the big four super majors did, right? So there was this whole wild card that was created by the United States, and that hugely changed the international oil markets. Now, this April, the pandemic briefly led U.S. oil prices to fall into negative territory for the first time ever. So much oil backed up in storage that investors literally paid people to take it off their hands. Do you remember this? At the very beginning of the pandemic, when we were just getting ready to lock down here in the United States, I was on Wall Street reporting for RT about the fact that the oil price had gone into the negative oil prices. Now, that obviously was something that had never happened before. That was pretty big, right? So there are signs that demand may not recover permanently. The International Energy Agency expects that global oil demand will peak sometime in the 2030s, even as the world churns through 90 million to 100 million barrels of oil a day for the next 2 decades. The challenge facing traditional oil and gas companies is how to make money as the industry changes. The minimum rate of return required to finance long-term oil projects has increased to as much as 20%, according to Goldman, compared with 3% for renewable projects. Even if oil prices go up due to a decrease in oil and gas supply, as analysts predict as we come out of the pandemic, right? Companies are unlikely to sign off on new mega projects due to long-term fears about energy. Exxon and Chevron primarily aim to address climate change by reducing carbon intensity of fossil fuels through technologies like carbon capture. The second option, predominantly pursued by European oil companies, involves a dramatic shift into investing in renewable energy based in part on the belief that oil may plateau sooner than expected. BP and Royal Dutch Shell have pledged to reach net zero carbon emissions using oil proceeds to fund billions of dollars of investment in renewable energy. So there is a divide now between the two, the four super major oil companies. ExxonMobil and Chevron, based in the United States, are saying that they're going to continue staying in the oil business, but they are going to try and, make oil less polluting. Meanwhile, BP and Royal Dutch Shell, both of which are based in London primarily, they are saying that they are predicting the end of the oil markets. This seems to indicate a divide among four entities, four major companies that functioned almost like a cartel, right? During the Obama years, it was very clear the big four super major oil companies were with Obama, and the fracking companies were with the Republicans. That was very clear. Fracking money was all over the Republican Party, all over the Tea Party protesters, all over Republicans, right? Sarah Palin was saying, drill now, drill now. Do you remember that? Meanwhile, the big four super majors, Exxon, BP, Chevron, Shell, they were the ones that were putting money, journalists I recommend, they were the ones that were putting money behind Obama, behind, some environmental activism, etc., right? The Rockefeller think tanks, Ford Foundation, etc. A lot of the Democrats seem to be tied in with big oil. Little oil was with the Republicans. But now it seems that in the era of Trump, the four super major oil companies that rode together during the Obama years have broken apart. ExxonMobil and Chevron are committed to continuing to have an oil-based global order, and BP and Shell, Royal Dutch Shell, are deciding that they want to basically transition away from oil, and they're funding renewable energy projects. This is big, okay? This is big. I keep having there's a Marxist song by Cornelius Cardew when he says that, it's kind of corny. Of all the Cornelius Cardew music, it's very corny. But there's a line, the capitalists fight with one another to corner the markets and divide up the world, right? This is what happens, right? As we enter a falling rate of profit, as a crisis of overproduction ensues, as the capitalist crisis gets more intense, alliances and factions among the ruling class that were once together fracture. So it seems like in the past 4 years, leading up to the pandemic, we have now seen a crack between the big four super major oil companies, right? It seems pretty clear here. ExxonMobil and Chevron are on one side. BP and Shell are on the other. And they have very different views. And Europe, mind you, Britain and Europe seem to be getting closer to China. ExxonMobil and Chevron are based in the United States, and we seem to be having a trade war with China. This is all very, very, very interesting. We talk about divides in the ruling class. You'll notice that during the Obama administration, it seemed like a lot of what Barack Obama was doing was repairing U.S. relations with Europe and with the NATO countries, right? Barack Obama, during his campaign, he went to Berlin and he spoke to a crowd of Berliners and got huge amounts of applause for it, right? That Barack Obama really emphasized alternative energy. You'll remember, that horrendous speech by John McCain that we can all never forget when he was speaking to the motorcycle rally in Sturgis, Sturgis, North Dakota, I believe, speaking to a motorcycle rally. And he's up there, Obama doesn't want to drill. He wants you to inflate your tires, rev up your engines, guys. I mean, it was like painful to watch. It was like comedy. John McCain was up there, and Obama doesn't want to drill, and all of this, and the price of gas is too high. That was a weird moment. But after that, Obama got into office, and he was making nice with Europe. And then you'll remember 2014 was the pivotal moment of the epic oil price drop. The oil price under Barack Obama just sunk. It just went right down. And it caused huge problems in Venezuela, caused problems in Iran, caused problems in Russia, but mainly, Venezuela was just devastated by that huge oil price drop. And that oil price drop was caused by Saudi Arabia. The frackers had something to do with it also, but it devastated them. They wanted to end it, right? They were putting more oil on the market, but then the Saudis just started churning out oil, and the Saudis are in with the big four. And the Saudis just started churning out oil, and it just sunk the international oil markets. So we have this weird situation where two of the oil companies, the super major oil companies, are doing one thing. The other two are doing another thing. That's really important, and that is going to be reflected in our politics. What existed during the Obama years, where the big four super major oil companies seemed to all basically be on the same page and with the White House, while the Republicans and the Tea Party were with the frackers, that alliance has broken apart. This is very, very interesting stuff, folks, right? Marxism is fundamentally about economics. It is fundamentally about economics when you get down to it. It is fundamentally about economics. Economics are a big part of Marxism. If Marxism to you is just an ideology, it's a utopian ideology, or it's a way to make yourself feel like a rebel or something. No, at the fundamentals of Marxism is economics. So the fact that there's a split among the big four super major oil companies is of great interest to me. And I'll be paying more attention to that as we go forward. That is very, very fascinating to me. Another thing that I thought was amusing, right? And of course, this is the Murdoch press. This is the neocons. This is Wall Street Journal. As they ran this article, just scathing against Netflix. They were just furious with Netflix. Couldn't stand that Netflix made this TV program, right? This is how the article begins. Andrew Colburn of Netflix ruined his life. As sheriff's sergeant, he helped convict a murderer in 2007. 8 years later, the streaming service debuted a documentary suggesting... Andrew Colburn says Netflix ruined his life. As a sheriff's sergeant, he helped convict a murderer in 2007. 8 years later, the streaming service debuted a documentary series suggesting that Mr. Colburn and his law enforcement colleagues had framed an innocent man. And this is all about how they're saying Netflix is anti-cop and anti-police, and it's just so, they can't stand Netflix. Netflix is it's hurting our good police officers, just like defund the police, just like Black Lives Matter, blah, 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 blah. And that's rather amusing. And I wanted to also note, if you go to my Twitter page, a report on the New York City Police Department's Vice Squad was released recently, and that had some very intense stuff on it. The way the New York City Police Department has gone about prosecuting sex workers has been pretty horrendous. That in a number of cases, just read what's in the report. There's cases where the woman is in her apartment with her children, wanting to be left alone, and there's a cop beating on the door, asking her for money for sex, and she keeps saying, "Go away, go away. I've got children here, go away." And then finally they burst in and arrest her and take her to jail. And she loses her kids. It's just horrendous stuff, right? Young people, a cop dressed as a prostitute walks by them and offers them, prostitution. They say no, and they arrest them anyway. Oh, it's their word against ours. Who cares, right? You read this report. It's just devastating. It's just devastating. And it seems to me that our criminal justice system in the United States, I feel like there's a society-wide recognition that we've got a problem. The question, of course, is what are we going to replace it with? This article, where the Murdoch press, the Fox News people are talking about how unfair Netflix is to these poor cops. Give me a break. Give me a break, right? Give me a break, okay? Like, first of all, like, you don't know how rigged the American legal system is, right? I mean, I am so tired of cop shows. People think they know and understand the police system and the legal system in the United States because they watch police shows. They watch Law and Order, and they watch Law and Order, and they watch what is it, CSI, and they watch that stuff on TV, that propaganda. And they think they understand the legal system. Folks, 99% of cases in the United States never go to trial. Right? Never do. Most cases in the United States, when someone gets arrested and charged with a crime, never goes to trial. Why? Because of the trial penalty. Right? If you go to trial and you're convicted, your sentence is going to be way bigger because you did the unpolite thing of making, like, judges and prosecutors do their jobs, right? So first of all, most people never go to trial. Okay, so if a case actually goes to trial in the United States, something's wrong with it, right? There's something wrong there. If a case goes to trial, either it's like, in some states, like in California, they've got the 3-strike law. So your third felony, you're going away for 25 years. You're going to do everything you can to fight it. Either like maybe someone's livelihood is on the line, right? Like, I mean, if you're convicted of a crime, you can't be a teacher or something. But other than that, if someone goes to trial, the chances are they're probably innocent. If someone is going to risk having a criminal trial, they're probably innocent. Right? Because people don't go to trial. People plead, right? Right? People plea bargain, right? The prosecutors don't want to actually, prosecute anybody, and the legal system doesn't want to spend the money of having a big long trial where, they don't want to do that. So they'll offer, people can be, guilty as sin, and they'll offer them a plea deal, and they'll plead it down to nothing, right? And this is a common complaint. So if a case goes to trial, if it actually goes to trial, the chances are either there is some special circumstances or the person is probably innocent, right? Nobody is going to risk the trial penalty going to trial unless there's a really, really big reason. Now, if they're very rich, for example, rich people, they'll do it, right? Because if they can hire, the most expensive lawyers, that's different, right? But if a person's not rich, if there's not special circumstances, like the person will be banned from teaching for life, if it's not their third felony, so they're going to go to jail for 25 years, if it goes to trial, either there's some special circumstances or the person's innocent. Okay, so keep that in mind. The conviction rate in the United States, is like 95%, right? In the Bronx in New York City, it has the lowest conviction rate in the country. The lowest conviction rate. And it's only 2/3, right? Labels about Marxism and QAnon. Okay. Marxism and QAnon. Russian. All right. And it's like, that's the lowest in the country. In the Bronx, New York City, right? In the Bronx, they have the lowest conviction rate in the country, and it's 2/3. Okay? Most places in the country, it's like 90%. Right? If you go to trial, the chances of you being acquitted are slim to none. But think about it. Think about this, though, right? If people only go to trial unless there's special circumstances or they're innocent, and the conviction rate is still about 95%, what is going on here? What is going on here? I mean, it shows that the trials are rigged. They're rigged for the prosecution, right? The prosecution has all the advantages, right? They introduce evidence at the last minute. They appeal to people's prejudices. That's a very common thing that they do, right? Everyone loves the friendly police officer, but they appeal to people's prejudices. Plus, prosecutors will go out of their way, and this is really sinister, to not prosecute people if they're deemed to be articulate, if they're white, if they have a high enough income to have a good lawyer. They won't prosecute them because they don't want to risk it, right? They'll go after people that are low income. They'll go after people who are disabled. They'll go after people that are ethnic minorities, and juries might be prejudiced against them. They go out of their way to pick on people who are going to have a hard time defending themselves, right? So the conviction rates are through the roof, right? I mean, even though the only reason somebody would actually probably go to trial is I mean, unless it's special circumstances, they're probably innocent if they go to trial. That is the American legal system, okay? And I mean, but we're supposed to believe the cops here are victims, right? I mean, so many of these cases, right? I mean, we're reading about how the Vice Squad here in New York City, the NYPD Vice Squad, goes around entrapping people, goes around arresting people when they do the opposite of what their crime is, right? They have the cop dressed as the prosecutor walk up to them and offer them sex for money, and they say, not interested, and then they arrest them. Right? That's the opposite of the crime. They did what they're legally supposed to do. They still arrest them. I mean, you read the details of this stuff. It gets even more horrendous, right? And that wrongful convictions. I mean, the city has paid out millions of dollars for wrongful convictions, right? People are wrongful convictions, wrongful arrests, where people not only do they get arrested wrongfully by the Vice Squad here in New York City, on top of that, they at that point they get acquitted when it gets to court. The charges are dropped. Then they sue and they win money from the city. I mean, it's pretty unbelievable. It's pretty unbelievable, this stuff. I mean, read the report. It's on my Twitter page. You can find it. It's pretty unbelievable. And the sad thing about this, right, is that people want to make this about authoritarianism versus non-authoritarianism. Right? And that's the way this often gets framed up by people who talk about these issues. They say it's authoritarianism, right? These police that are doing all these entrapments and these juries that convict people and the way the legal system is set up to like basically favor the prosecution. They say, well, this is all authoritarianism. No, it's not. Right? Right? Think about like the most authoritarian state you can think of, right? Think about Singapore, right? Lee Kuan Yew institutes the death penalty for bringing drugs. You bring drugs into Singapore, they kill you, right? Think about Lee Kuan Yew. He has public canings, right? He canes people. They have like public beatings of people who, chew gum on the sidewalk or something, right? Think about that, right? The thing is, Lee Kuan Yew, definitely an authoritarian, if there ever was one, definitely. But in Lee Kuan Yew's Singapore, they don't have the police try to frame people. They don't have police officers in the airports before they get to Singapore. Hey, you want some drugs? So they can take them to Singapore and shoot them. No, the authoritarianism is intended for the purpose of stopping crime. And it's made clear, if you cross this line, you will face a very harsh penalty. But there's no crazy, insane drive to arrest people. There's no, the reason they have these harsh penalties is so the police don't have to arrest people, right? I mean, it's set up so that these harsh penalties rarely happen, right? The idea, right, is behind this authoritarianism is to control society, authority, right? It's about controlling people, right? Authoritarianism is generally control, right? It's about controlling people. What the NYPD is doing right now with their Vice Squad, what the U.S. legal system is doing is not controlling people. It's not controlling people. I mean, it's not. I mean, when people are arrested for crimes they didn't commit, they're not being controlled. And when people realize that, are they more likely to follow the rules? No. I mean, we've created a legal system. I mean, we know about prisons for profit. We know about that and the quotas and cops being pressured to make arrests, and it's all a big capitalist mess. It is all a big capitalist mess. I just wanted to mention that, right? I saw Netflix, the attack on Netflix in the Wall Street Journal, and then I read the report about the Vice Squad and their nefarious activities. I mean, they target transgender people. That's one thing that goes on. I've been protesting against that for a long time. The targeting of transgender people. They assume that transgender people must be engaging in prostitution if they're walking down the street. There's actually a talk of a law, to basically, protect trans people from this kind of, being arrested for walking while trans. But this isn't authoritarianism. This is just chaos, right? When people get arrested for not breaking the law, When you have a legal system that's set up where they really don't want to give anybody a trial, so they try their hardest to get people to plea bargain. When people are guilty as sin of a crime, when they're just guilty of a crime, but they can plead it down to nothing. When people who are innocent, risk a trial penalty and have like 95% of the chance of being convicted when they actually go to trial. The legal system in the United States is not authoritarianism. It's not. It's not an authoritarian system. It is the Wild West. It is capitalists trying to make profit. It's crazy institutions that are tied to, crazy institutions that are tied to profit-making institutions, prison for profit, and privatized policing. I mean, you look at the legal system in the United States; it's a complete and utter mess. People who break the law get away with it, and people who don't break the law get very harshly treated. You have policing agencies that are out of control, trying to justify their budgets. Entrapment goes on. I mean, this whole thing, this is not Michel Foucault, right? Michel Foucault, the French philosopher, he has that whole thing about no, like throw all that out, right? That's not what's going on here. This is capitalism in crisis, right? This is the profit system run amok. That's what's going on here. Um, you know, I just wanted to communicate that. This is just kind of me off the top of my head. We went through the paper. We talked about a few things. This is not like a deeply profound speech I'm giving here. This is just kind of me reminiscing about the world. But I wanted to talk about that. I was disturbed. I was deeply disturbed by seeing that report. And I was also deeply disturbed by seeing, oh, how dare Netflix suggest this cop may have convicted somebody wrongly. Of course, I mean, give me a break, right? But I also wanted to mention, a lot of people like my book, Getting Rich Without Capitalism. It's kind of an introductory agitational text. A lot of people like City Builders and Vandals. A lot of people like my book on Kamala Harris. But not many people know about a book that I wrote, History of Yugoslavia. All right. Not many people know about a book that I wrote. I published this book. Any tips for friends reading Capital? All right. Tips on reading Capital. All right. I wanted to mention that I did publish this book, The Rise and Fall of the U.S. Communist Party. I published this book, and I gave a class in 2015. In 2015, October 15th, 2015, as my relationship with the political organization I was in for a long time came to an end, I gave a class. I rented studio space in Manhattan, and I gave this class on the history of the Communist Party of the United States. And it was very well attended. I'll actually read you the introduction here. This booklet is based on a presentation given by the author on October 15th, 2015, at the Manhattan Theater Club. Approximately 30 people attended the informal class. 5 narrative sections of the presentation were punctuated by discussion. An edited audio recording is available online. Yeah, and you can listen to the audio online. The topic of the class attracted interest from a variety of people in New York City. Among those who attended were members of various leftist organizations as well as independent activists. The class was attended by both men and women, including those of white, black, Latino, and Asian backgrounds. The age range of those in attendance varied between 19 and 74. The venue was rented because no leftist organization would offer its space for the informal class. The content of the presentation, reprinted in this booklet, did not conform to the ideological narrative of any existing Marxist tendency. Those in attendance often strongly disagreed with the presenter as well as with each other during the discussion. The text of Caleb Maupin's presentation is followed by representative writings from the historical periods discussed. The passages have been selected in order to give the reader a deeper understanding of the Communist Party's perspective and rhetorical style during various time periods. And I gave this class. Vosh made a new vid. Okay, who cares? Who cares what Jabba the Vosh said? All right. And so I gave this class, and I divided like the history of the Communist Party USA up into 5 sections. 5 sections. And basically, I start with the time period when the Communist Party was established. From there, I go into the 1920s, then into the third period, or what the people call the ultra-left period of the Communist Party. And then from there, I go into the Popular Front period, and then from there, I do the post-World War II years. And then I included a selective writings from the Communist Party. I have a text by Charles Ruthenberg. I have a text by Gus Hall. I have a text by John Pepper. I have sections from William Z. Foster's writings on the history of the Communist Party. I include a lot of photographs, and, there's a beautiful, beautiful text by Angelo Herndon, right? Angelo Herndon was an African-American man who was a leader of the Communist Party, who was charged with inciting black people to revolt, which was like a capital offense in Alabama at the time. And he wrote this beautiful text called "You Cannot Kill the Working Class," and I quote that at length in here. And this is a good volume if you're interested in in what the Communist Party was all about and its history and how it evolved over the years. I would encourage you to check this out. Check out this text, right? This is a cartoon with capitalism, right? It's got the lynch mob and the police and the fascists and all of that. I included a lot of photographs of what I was talking about. I tried to make it interesting, right? And I feel like there's a lot of people who watch these lives who would really enjoy that. Look, this is the 1939 convention of the Communist Party, right? They've got Abraham Lincoln there, and it's just beautiful stuff, right? That was in Madison Square Garden, right? You've got the Communist Party marching for Ethiopia, right? When Mussolini invaded Ethiopia. In Harlem, they had protests in support of Ethiopia, right? Imagine now, right? They'd be like, oh my God, communists are supporting that evil dictator Haile Selassie. The Italian fascists are just trying to civilize them. Vosch would support, he would probably support Italian fascism and invading Ethiopia, and attack us all for being rotten tankies for supporting Haile Selassie and the Ethiopian people against imperialism, right? You can imagine, right? But no, we've got and pictures from the sit-down strikes, right? The workers there, clashing with the police during the sit-down strikes. I really put together a really nice volume, right? We've got the very famous, there's no such thing as sex workers, they are ultimate victims. Okay. Alrighty. Sex workers, politics. Thanks, Frank. And I will address that in there's this very famous poster. This was a campaign poster, an actual campaign poster for William Z. Foster in 1932. It says, "Equal rights for black people everywhere. Vote communist." What will your synthetic left book be about? Well, I'll give you a hint. No, I'm just kidding. I'll give you an answer. All right. Synthetic left. Synthetic left book. All right. But, this is, and it has the black belt, right? The region of the United States that is majority African-American, or was at that time, and I think still is, right? And it's, it talks about self-determination for the black belt. It's got William Z. Foster and James W. Ford. This book is something special, If you want to really learn about the history of communism, I got the Minneapolis Teamsters strike. This is the unemployment councils. Why can't you give my dad a job, right? 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 We are citizens, not transients. This is the actual history of the real movement. If you want to understand the history of Marxism in the United States, we want justice for Sacco and Vanzetti, right? I would say there are 2 organizations that you should study: the Communist Party and the Black Panther Party, right? Now, there was some stuff that came before that that's relevant, right? The Socialist Party and the IWW are both relevant, but they were both kind of premature formations. But if you want to understand 2 communist groups in the United States that had a real impact, there's really only 2 that had a really substantial impact: the Communist Party and the Black Panthers. Now, this is my history of the Communist Party, and it's based on a presentation I gave, very well attended. I think you should get a copy of this if you really want to understand the Communist Party. And if you want to understand the Black Panthers, I think the best volume on the history of the Black Panthers that's ever been published is Mumia Abu Jamal's book, We Want Freedom, A Life in the Black Panther Party by Mumia Abu-Jamal. That's a very, very good book. We Want Freedom, A Life in the Black Panther Party. So, you know, modern CPUSA. All right. That's what I would recommend. I would recommend that's where you go. Um, but other than the Communist Party USA and the Black Panthers, no communist group other than them really had an impact. The Trotskyites kind of did in Minneapolis in 1934. They did have an impact on the Teamsters Union. Okay, in the mid 30s, the Teamsters Union was dominated by Trotskyites. So the SWP kind of for like 10 seconds, well, not 10 seconds, but for a little while, the Trotskyites had a lot of influence in the Teamsters Union. They led the Minneapolis Teamsters strike, and they helped unionize places like Nebraska and Iowa, and it was called the Siege of the Midwest. And they were part of that. So the Trotskyites kind of, had an impact for a few years. By the time World War II started, they were finished. They were done. And ever since then, they were just raving anti-communists. And even at the time they were running the Teamsters Union, they were still, very, 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 anti-communist and corrupt and such. But they kind of had an impact. And Eugene Debs was a very, very important agitator. Right, he was a very, very important leader. But the Socialist Party that Eugene Debs led, it was massive. It was a very big group. It represented probably about 1 million people, but it was very, very divided. In fact, Eugene Debs himself was not a member of it. He was their candidate for president, but he himself never actually joined it. And it was all kinds of people, Marxists and Social Democrats and Christian Socialists and Utopians and you had sewer socialists in Wisconsin. You had anarchists. The Socialist Party of America, back in its heyday before World War I, was a mass organization, but it was all over the place, right? You had the foreign language federations. It was all over the place. You had the IWW, the Wobblies, and they were very important. The Wobblies were very, very important in fighting for freedom of speech, and they were involved in some early labor struggles. There's a very important museum in New Jersey, because in New Jersey there's actually there was a very important strike that the Wobblies were involved in New Jersey, and I can't remember what town it is, but it's in New Jersey. It was among textile workers, and the Wobblies, in Colorado, among the miners, and in other parts of the country, they led some very key labor struggles. But ultimately, though, because they refused to sign contracts, that was one of their principles. They refused to sign contracts because they had this bloody turf war with the American Federation of Labor. Because they were, they were a union that you basically had to be a communist in order to join. UFOs, Jesus, okay. UFO files, all right. Because of that, they never really got a lot done. But, the Communist Party, the Black Panther Party, those are two groups that if you really, really want to study them, they're important. I actually gave a speech at one point, and I highlighted the Black Panthers, and I highlighted the Communist Party, and I was criticized for that. ILWU, that's a good question, ILWU. And I was criticized for that, and they said, well, why did you just talk about these two groups? And I said, because they're the two groups that have actually gotten something done, right? And there's a million little tiny Trotskyite groups, little tiny Maoist groups. Some of them did one good thing. They had like one accomplishment, like one crowning achievement. But other than that, most of them are pretty irrelevant, right? Paterson, New Jersey, Silk Strike. Very good, Vorotheus, right? That was that. And there's a museum, actually, you can go to in New Jersey and learn about the Paterson Strike. And Elizabeth Gurley Flynn was a very prominent leader of it. And John Reed, he made a Broadway play to raise money for it. Really, the Communist Party and the Black Panthers, those are the two groups that are worth studying. The Communist Party's history is very long and complicated because it was around a long time. It was formed in 1919, technically merged into 1991 until 1921, and it's still around, technically. I think it decreased in relevance after the Cold War. Once the Cold War ended, it stopped being when during the Cold War, the Communist Party was like the U.S., U.S. representative of the Soviet ML current. Right now, the Communist Party is a faction. It is a socialist organization. But it's one of many groups, right, that has ties internationally. I mean, during the Cold War, the Communist Party of the United States they were the U.S. wing of the Soviet-led global Marxist movement. Now, I mean, they're still very important, but they don't have the huge geopolitical relevance. I mean, during the 1980s, Gus Hall, the presidential candidate of the Communist Party, would get called by like major leaders of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and they'd ask his input because he was the representative of the Soviet, aligned global Marxist movement. So, I trace in this book the history of the Communist Party from the time of its inception up until the Cold War, the end of the Cold War, and you should really check it out. And if you want to listen, there's an audio recording on the internet. The audio recording does end in the 1950s because I ran out of space on my I was recording it with my phone, I believe, and I just ran out of space. Like it just stopped recording in the 1950s. So if you want to hear the rest of it, you want to hear about their alliance, their short-lived alliance with the Black Panthers, right? That's something people don't talk about, right? That again, nothing is permanent, right? When the Black Panthers first started, the Communist Party condemned them, said it was ultra-left adventurous, they shouldn't be marching around with guns. But, see, and this is there's a lot of people that just give you a snippet of history as if that's the whole story. That's not the whole story. So yes, when the first time the Black Panthers got going, 1966, started doing their armed patrols in Oakland, the Communist Party condemned it as ultra-left adventurism. But then, right, after Richard Nixon got elected, after COINTELPRO was coming down very hard on the Black Panthers, after Fred Hampton was killed, the Black Panthers and the Communist Party had an alliance. And there was actually a faction in the Communist Party called the Che Lumumba Club. And it was led by Angela Davis. It was mainly African-American members. And they provided political education to the Black Panthers. And the Black Panthers had a national conference to build a united front against fascism. And the Communist Party was featured very prominently at that conference. And there was, the Black Panthers, because they were under attack, entered a strategic alliance with the Communist Party. And the Communist Party, at that point, dropped its criticism. And for a couple years, 1969, 1970, 1971, 1972, the Black Panthers and the Communist Party were on good terms with each other. Very fascinating. People don't realize that. Now things went downhill pretty quickly, but again, people want to just, and later, the Communist Party has since 1956 opposed black nationalism, but there was a brief alliance between the Communist Party and the Black Panthers, right? And I talk about that in this book. I talk about the Maoist movement and how the Communist Party, fought with the Maoist movement and some of the positions it took. I talk about Euro-communism, right? Many people, in the 70s, and in the late 70s, 1978, major communist parties in Europe denounced the Soviet Union. The U.S. Communist Party never did. They never became Euro-communist. They never had a Euro-communist turn. So, I talk about this, right? And I think understanding the history of the Communist Party, and especially if you're in it now, but even if you're not in it now, even if you're just interested in getting something good going, I would recommend checking out my book on the Communist Party. So there you go. Wow, I thought I was only going to go an hour, and I'm not even done with my opening remarks, and it's an hour, and I got a bunch of super chats to get through. So yeah, this wasn't a big epic speech tonight. This was just me kind of rambling about what's on my mind. Read you the newspaper a little bit, talked about my book on the Communist Party. So why don't we do our roll call? Folks? I'm glad I got on here and did this, but there you go. Glad you're with me. Glad you're enjoying me rambling about oil prices and such. So, yeah, roll call, folks. Names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Australia, Nevada, Henderson, Nevada, Cleveland, Pirate Alex, Chicago, Los Angeles, Las Vegas, David in Italy, Wilmington, Delaware, JT24 in Mississippi, Mo in Toronto, Canada, Dayton, Ohio, Christian Stevens, Albany, New York, Vancouver, Canada, Denver, Zurich, Switzerland, Cincinnati, Ohio, Lexington, Springfield, USA, Milwaukee, Los Angeles, Netherlands, Tampa, Florida, Herb Bryant, Arizona, Dallas, Latafunda, Texas, Houston, Texas, Eureka, Illinois, New York City, Louis from Boston, Palo, Round Mountain, California, Allende, Mexico, Pennsylvania, Four Oaks, North Carolina, Milwaukee, Cleveland, Anthony Penza, Ray from Planet Earth, Hafe, Nowhere Particular, Northern California, Wilmington, Delaware, Locationsville, Auckland, New Zealand, Syracuse, Campbell, California, Long Island, New York. Very good. Los Angeles, Mohsen from Iran, Shah from Maryland, Vladivostok. Wow. Out east. San Jose, Kieran from San Diego, Georgia, Des Moines, Iowa, Strawberry Fields, forever. Glendale, California. Very, very, very good. Nate from Sydney, CPUSA Cadre in Florida, New York City, Javier. Very good, very, very good. Yeah, High Point, North Carolina, Union, New Jersey. Very good. Well, folks, we've got a number of super chats to get to, but keep them rolling in, right? I got work in the morning, but hey, I can answer your questions. Who else? Who else is with us tonight? Joey from Belize. Very good. Glad you're here, Joey. Jenny Lynn from Cincinnati is with us. You know my name, not to be said out loud, somewhere in New York City. Ooh. Right? We're all going to lose sleep over that one. Auckland, New Zealand. Was John Brown an ultra-left adventurist? That's a good question. John Brown. All right, question mark. De Pere, Wisconsin. Alrighty. Night City. Very good. Alrighty. So the super chat questions. And if you're just with us now, be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. Be sure to share this on Reddit, on Facebook, on Bunkered Chan, on Twitter, on YouTube, on whatever you want. By the way, people have often asked me, they've seen the segment that I do on here, and they've said, "Oh, this should be a standalone clip." Cut it yourself. Do it. This isn't copyrighted on here. Okay, so if you like a little chunk of something I said, cut it up. Oklahoma, hello, Caleb. Well, Oklahoma, hello, you. But yeah, if you like something, cut it up, right? Put it out there, right? Somebody did that. A guy who has a YouTube channel, he cut something he liked that I said about science fiction. That's great. Do it, right? Washington Monument, says Christian Stevens. Okay, have fun at the Washington Monument. All right. So let's start getting through these super chat questions. All right, Jimmy Dore and AOC. I saw that Jimmy Dore's name was trending, and I thought, is this for real? Is this for real? And I looked, and yes, Jimmy Dore was trending on Twitter. And so I thought, well, that's good, because I like Jimmy Dore, right? And I generally like Jimmy Dore, right? I mean, he's good on international issues. He's an anti-imperialist. He's critical. He calls out the Democrats. He calls out the pseudo-left. And, he's a progressive, and he's just great in a lot of ways. I love Jimmy Dore. I really do. I mean, he's funny to listen to. Very different style than me. I mean, he's a comedian, right? And he does his own thing. I love Jimmy Dore. He's great. And he's just a great guy. So I saw that his name was trending on Twitter. I'm like, what in the heck is going on here? So I got on Twitter and I looked, and so he and AOC were fighting it out. And the radical liberals, the radlibs, were condemning him, and his supporters were supporting him. Look, folks, okay, I will tell you this, okay? See, now, I think Jimmy Dore is right. He's absolutely right. Right, that the Democrats and AOC and the squad, if they really believe in health care for all, they should fight for it. They should come out swinging, right? They should stand up to Nancy Pelosi. I think he's right. That said, I urge people, not Jimmy Dore. Jimmy Dore is doing his thing, and he's doing a great job of it. More power to him for calling her out. I urge people to be a little careful with the kind of cancel culture is never good. And it's especially not good for politicians, because you have to remember, politicians are politicians, right? Politicians, they don't represent themselves. They don't roll out of bed and say, what am I going to do this morning, right? Politicians, any politician, they're at the head of a coalition. They are the representative of a coalition. And often that coalition is special interests and business interests. But when you talk about progressive politicians, elected socialists, it's labor unions, it's activist groups, and, they have to keep that coalition together and behind them in order to get elected. And, if you want to influence a politician to be more progressive, join their coalition, number one, and make the case to them that it would be in their interest as a politician to work in the way that you would like. Right? AOC has disappointed me a number of times. And keep in mind, I've met AOC. Okay? I met AOC before AOC was anything. All right? Before anyone ever heard of AOC, before she even went by the initials AOC, I had met AOC. There's a photograph of us together. I'm surprised they haven't canceled AOC for it yet, right? AOC's Nazbol, right? I'm sitting with somebody else who's also got I don't know. But, I've met AOC on multiple occasions. And I met her once before she was whatever. And, and I'm sure, well, I don't want to say too much, but there's been times where we were in the same place and didn't know who each other were and, whatever. But there was a time I met AOC before she was AOC, and it was a nice little reception. And then I've met her, I went to a thing, and, I've met her as she's been AOC also. And, the thing is, right, so she's disappointed me, right? When she met with those Bolivian folks that were anti-moralist, that was a disappointment. Her statements on Venezuela have been a huge disappointment. But if you want to change AOC, which I'm a journalist, right? I'm not involved in lobbying anybody. I'm not, so I'm not trying to change AOC, right? I'm not trying to change AOC. But if you want to change AOC, the way to do it is to not tweet at her and call her a dumbass, right? If you want to change AOC, the way to change AOC would be to, go to her office, meet the people at her office, get involved in her campaign, defend her from Republican attacks, and make the case to the people she works with about why these international issues are important. And honestly, the fact that AOC is an international celebrity, is a member of Congress who considers herself a socialist, is a millennial, young woman, Latina. It's pretty good to have her there. She's been a disappointment in a lot of ways. But, and Jimmy Dore is absolutely right to say, hey, if you really want, healthcare, stand up and fight for it, call her out, that's fine. But the way to influence people in politics and the way to get what you want is not to have a blood feud and not to cancel people because they do things wrong and they disappoint you. Okay? That's not the way this works. And, AOC has taken some bad stances, but who knows? She could take some good stances at some point. FDR did amazing things, but he did some awful things also. And that politicians, like I said, they represent a coalition of interests, a coalition of groups. Multiple forces are behind them, and I don't think it's strategic for those of us who are socialists and all of that to just go, F you, AOC, you piece of garbage. No, she's disappointed us all in a lot of ways. Okay, let's not pretend she hasn't. She has disappointed us all in a lot of ways, but at the same time, does she have the potential to be better? Yes. Will she be better if we all give her the middle finger? No. Will she be better if we get our shit together? And if there was a massive, real anti-imperialist communist movement, right? That she might feel like, geez, I want to listen to these people. So, it's okay to criticize her. Everyone's free to do that, but I just urge people to chill out with the and that's the problem with Twitter. Twitter encourages people to just disagree all day, right? Just cancel everybody all day, right? That's not how these things work. That's not how these things work. If you want to actually get things done, you have to sometimes work with people who've disappointed you in some ways. Look, you've all got friends. I assume you do. Maybe you don't. But, and I'm sorry if you don't. My heart goes out to you if you don't. But I have friends. There are many people I know. And many of them have done amazing things that I love them for. But they've all done some things that I wish they hadn't done. And sometimes I will make a choice with my friends to just be assertive and say, you know what? You're my good friend. We've had some amazing times together and all of that. But I just want to let you know, this thing you did the other day, didn't like it. You let me down. You have to do that as a friend, right? That's the right thing to do, right? But sometimes my friend will just do something I don't like, and I'll think, am I going to change their behavior? Well, this is just who they are. This is what we have to accept. This is where they're at. It's a calculated decision in a friendship, in a relationship, in an acquaintance with somebody. Do you call them out? If every time somebody you knew, right, if you were trying to have a business relationship with somebody, if you were trying to work with somebody, and every time they did something you didn't like, you were like, F you, you piece of garbage, you would have no friends, you would have no business relationships, right? That's not how, you don't get through the world by condemning people. Thank you, Herb Bryant. You don't get through the world by shouting, F you, you piece of crap. You don't get through the world that way, right? Now, if it's a serious thing, you can say to your friend, look, you let me down here. I'm not cool with what you did here. I want to still be your friend, but you screwed up here. Or you might say, you know what? You've gone too far, friend. You screwed up so much this time. We're not going to be friends anymore. You are not my friend. We're done. But it's a calculated decision, right? It's a calculated decision. People let you down, folks. People let you down. And when you meet people, you have to meet them with that understanding. If you go through life, assuming that no one will ever let you down, and there's some people that do this, right? You may know people like this. They meet somebody new, and there's like this honeymoon period where the person can do nothing wrong, right? I've met many people like this. It's so sad. There are a lot of millennials. I'm a millennial, right? Maybe Zoomers are better. Maybe they're worse. But you meet people, and it's like they meet somebody, and they're like, wow, I just met Joey Bob. And you're like, the clock is ticking. The second they meet him, the clock is ticking, tick, 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 tick. And it's a week, 2 weeks, a month before they hate Joe Bob. Right? I mean, you've met people like that, right? It's like they meet somebody, they're new, they're exciting, they're happy to have the friendship, and a month goes by, and they're like, fuck that piece of garbage. You don't want to be that way. Right? I mean, that's a way to make sure you never have a long-term relationship. If whenever you meet somebody, you build them up in your mind to be infallible, somebody who's incapable of making a mistake, and then after about a month, you've just had it with Joe Bob, you let me down. You're a piece of crap. I thought you were the world. I thought you were Superman. You turned out to be Lex Luthor, so go to hell. Most people are not Superman. Most people are not Lex Luthor. AOC, she's better than most of them. Right? She's better than most of them on Capitol Hill. Her, Bernie Sanders. Bernie's let me down too, but she's better than most of them on Capitol Hill. Bernie's better than most of them on Capitol Hill. So you know what? Jimmy Dore is right. Jimmy Dore is absolutely right in what he's saying. Yeah, she should fight for health care for all, but she's not. She's not, and that's who she's at. And so based on that, we have to decide, right, now, do we want to just cancel her? Do we want to just say, you know what, AOC, you let us down. You're a piece of crap. Go away. Or do we want to say, you know what, AOC, Jimmy's right. Jimmy's right. You could fight for health care. You're not doing it. And you've let us down. And we're going to let you know that. But we're also going to have your back against the Republicans. We're also going to have your back. I mean, think about it, right? Think about it, right? Who knows, right? It's based on the circumstances. It's based on what is best for getting to socialism. I personally hope, I don't know, I hope that AOC will improve as the years go on, right? That's my hope. My hope is that AOC will get better, but she might not, so we'll just have to see. And I hope that I'm sounding like common sense here, right? And that's the thing, nuance, right? Is Jimmy Dore right? Yes. Is AOC wrong? Yes. Does that mean we should all hate AOC? No. Nuance, folks. Nuance. The world is not black and white. These things are more complicated, right? And I think I've probably run this point into the ground, so I'm going to move on to the next super chat. All right. Next point. All right. My view of Antifa and Black Lives Matter, is it corporatized? Well, okay, so Antifa, all right? I have made videos where I've talked about Antifa before. There was a beautiful event in the 1930s called the Battle of Cable Street. I don't know if people know about it, right? When Oswald Mosley, the leader of the British Union of Fascists, was going to have a parade in a Jewish neighborhood, and all kinds of communists and leftists came and kicked his ass, and it was this glorious moment, the Battle of Cable Street. There was in 1939 in Madison Square Gardens, they were going to have a Nazi rally. They did have a Nazi rally, and thousands of workers came out and kicked their ass. Beautiful. So, based on that history, I used to be very, very excited about antifa stuff. Years ago, I used to think, oh my God, yeah. Well, after after a couple years where I wasn't in a communist group and I wasn't building rallies, I was actually going around the country and just interviewing people, watching national media. I changed my position, right? And I realized I was wrong. I think that there's probably a lot of people that do Antifa stuff that are good people that have good intentions. But honestly, I don't think what they're doing is helping. I will never forget. There was an event in California where there was some right wing, some white supremacist group was having a rally. They had like 10 people in California. Antifa showed up, and before Antifa got into it and beat up the right wingers, they attacked the media, and they beat up the media first. Well, do you think the media is going to? I mean, how do you think that looks, right? Well, they didn't want to be filmed while they did what? Not a big fan, um, folks. Right? Oswald Mosley in the 1930s was building a group of people that went around committing hate crimes and beating up Jewish people and committing crimes, calling for the assassination and murder of communist leaders. So he was going to have a hate rally in a Jewish neighborhood on Capel Street, and people defended themselves. It was self-defense, right? New York City, 1939. Madison Square Gardens, they were going to have a big pro-Hitler rally. There had been pro-Hitler groups in Manhattan that had been committing crimes, and the U.S. government was, it was a bad time, and so, people went and fought the fascists. This was self-defense, right? Right now, the fascist groups are primarily an ideological threat. They are wrong, okay? And they're very wrong, right? They are very, very wrong. Um, and there are hate crimes that go on, no doubt. No doubt there are hate crimes. But for the most part, Nazis, fascists, people like that, right now, what they are doing is they are engaging in ideological struggle. They are trying to put their ideas out there and recruit. And when your opponent is putting their ideas out there, the way to respond is with your ideas, right? And what Antifa does, in my view, is that one of these Ku Klux Klan neo-Nazi kind of people is going to have a rally, all right? And they're having a rally, and Antifa shows up and attacks them or whatever. And then they go, look at me, I'm a victim, I'm the victim. And the media, it's all about them. Meanwhile, what is the response to them? Right? People in black masks beating them up. Right? They get all the attention. Look, Antifa, what is it? It's anti-fascist. It's not for anything. So the far left, are a bunch of people in masks who go around beating people up in the public mind. And these fascists go, look at us, listen to my ideas. My ideas are so dangerous and important that it's like free publicity for them. It's free publicity for them, number one. Their ideas never get refuted. There's actually an old story it's an old story. The story is that, two men are screaming at each other in a marketplace, right? They're just screaming at each other, just back and forth, screaming at each other. And there's a little boy, and he's there with his father, and he says, why do they just keep screaming at each other? Why don't they just punch each other? And the father says to the little boy, he says, because the man who throws the first punch will be admitting that the other man's arguments are correct. Right? A lot of truth in that, right? That when fascists are out there spewing ideas, they need to be responded to with ideas. Right? When fascists are throwing punches, people need to have the right to defend themselves. But at this point, it's an ideological threat. And mainly the reason fascism is on the march, in my view, is because of the fact that there is no real leftism. Right? You listen to some of these fascists, where it really gets down to it, these are people that are looking for economic leftism, right? They're looking for populism. They're looking for all of that. And they see the left has become this crazy, chaos-loving, angry, self-destructive, pessimistic group, and they don't want it, right? And that they assume that you have to be a right-winger in order to want a better country. Well, you don't. You can be a socialist and want a better country, but not according to various creatures and not according to BreadTube, right? Oh no. So there's a bit of a problem, right? I don't think the way Antifa is operating is helping, honestly. I think it actually helps embolden the fascist threat because it makes them look like victims. It makes them all the center of attention. That's what I think. And I've debated fascists before. I debated Augustus Sol Invictus, and I had a debate. And Brenton, the anarchist, was in the room, and some other leftists were in the room. But some Proud Boy fascists were also in the room. We had a debate. And it was a debate, and I horsewhipped him down Main Street. So, he just, I've debated fascists before. And what's crazy is the left has gotten so insane, right? That people don't know what debate means. Debate means argue against. But see, there's no, and this is where I get angry, right? Debate means argue against, right? But there is this no platform stuff, which I have had people tell me that they think I'm a fascist because I debated fascists. It's like, if I were a fascist, I wouldn't be debating fascists, I would be agreeing with fascists. But see, the left, there is this anti-intellectualism that has developed, right? And that is a big problem, right? On the left, you're not allowed to know anything, right? Look who the voices of leftism are. I'm not going to say their names. They don't know anything. Right? There's this clown who thinks that Marxist theory of overproduction is the same thing as saying the planet's going to explode because we don't have enough resources and we need to reduce the population and consumption. Some clown who plays video games. That's who the voice of leftism is. So of course they don't know anything, right? They don't know anything, right? But you're not supposed to know anything. I for years I was in a group and there was all this, oh, shut up, white man. We don't want to know anything. Knowing anything is autistic. Knowing anything is racist white male shit. We just want to be in the streets and protest. Woohoo, man. It's anti-intellectualism. Okay, there's just a huge amount of anti-intellectualism. And a lot of these people that confusedly get into this fascist stuff are white men, white males, who are seriously thinking about issues. And they see the left as a place where seriously thinking about issues is not tolerated. And they see the right as a group of people who just sit around wanking about Evola and various right-wing thinkers all day, and they think, oh, I'm a smart person. If I go to the left, I'm going to be a shut-up white male, and if I go to the right, they're going to love me. So, right-wingers read books, right-wingers talk about ideology, leftists say, look, they're creating an atmosphere. I'm not on the right. I am not on the right, right? For years, you can read articles published about me in 2010 when I was, filming acts of police brutality, for years I've been on the left. I was going to court with police brutality victims, long before Black Lives Matter had ever been tweeted, but they're, all over the internet, people think I'm on the right. I'm not on the right, but you know what? If I were deciding, if I were somebody who was confused, if I wasn't already very solidly on the left, I'd be on the right now because I would see the left as a group of hostile people, and I'd say, oh, okay, you guys are assholes, I'll be over here. I am very committed to left-wing ideals, so I'm obviously not going to do that, right? I know what I believe. I am opposed to racism. I believe in historical progress. My values are left-wing. But my views have already been solidly formed by years of activism, international travels, etc. A lot of people that are just getting political now, their views are not solidly formed. And they see the left as a toxic, pessimistic, anarchist death cult. And they see the right as this welcoming place where people talk about ideas. And look, we just want to talk about ideas and we're getting beaten up by antifa. Look, the left is going in a very dangerous direction right now. That's why I'm on here talking about synthetic left. And that's why I do this, is because I am a person who is genuinely left-wing. I believe in socialism. I'm an anti-imperialist. I believe in opposing racism, black and white united fight, workers' solidarity. And I've seen how dangerous the situation is because the right the right, has become, a place where a lot of people who should be left are going, and that scares me. It honestly scares me. And I'm willing to engage with these people and argue with them and tell them why they're wrong. And I'm willing to do that. And that alone is a crime, because think in this crazy internet cult that has developed, where, oh, you talk to so and so, you're a Nazbol. I don't know what a Nazbol is, but you're one of those. I mean, it's just, it's like, look at me. I mean, my goodness. Look at who I am. If I start listing my accomplishments, people are gonna, that's a crime in and of itself. But I mean, for the last 10, 20, or the last 10 or 12 years, I've been doing left-wing activism. I've marched, against the NYPD and their anti-trans policies. I have marched around, police brutality issues in Cleveland. I was like, I was like featured in the news for my anti-police brutality activism. I was demonized as a communist agitator, and my record as a leftist is very long. That doesn't matter, right? To this stupid, disgusting internet cult, I'm the same as a Ku Klux Klan member, right? I get people tell me this all the time. I get messages in my inbox. You're the reason transgender teenagers kill themselves, Caleb. I am? Really? Really? Is that really? This stupid internet bread tube cult cannot tell the difference between me and David Duke. And if that doesn't tell you that something is very, very wrong, something is very, very, very wrong, if that doesn't wake you up to know that something is really, really wrong, if the Antifa crowd cannot tell the difference between me and an actual white supremacist, Holocaust denying, murder advocating, genocide advocator, right? And I'm a leftist, there's something deeply wrong. And that in and of itself is an argument against Antifa. Right? I mean, that is an argument against the Antifa, if there ever was one, right? That there's been an atmosphere created where, these people, it's shocking, right? I will kid you not. I had someone unfriend me on Facebook, someone who'd been my friend for years, someone who, well, I won't say more. I don't want people to identify the person, because I posted against the movie Cuties. I disagreed with the movie Cuties, right? I thought it was not appropriate. And I still think that. I don't think that movie was appropriate. I think it was trying to appeal to pedophiles. That's not right. I posted that. Someone sent me a message, and they said that my post against the movie Cuties was dog whistling homophobia, and that I was drawing from Focus on the Family propaganda that equates gay people with pedophiles. And I read that, and I'm like, what the I never thought in a million years I'd have someone unfriend me and accuse me of being an anti-gay fascist because I posted against the movie Cuties. Okay? That was beyond me. But that's how sick this stuff has gotten. Right? It's insane, right? And again, this person who unfriends me because I disapprove of the movie Cuties, in their mind, cannot tell the difference between me and Fred Phelps, the God hates gay people or guy, right? It's like the left has gotten so insane. There's a lot of people that are just coming up, just getting political, young white men mainly, that are just getting political and going, geez, should I go right? Should I go left? And they see the left and they go, okay, I'll go to the right. And that's a problem. That is a big problem, because the right is a road to nowhere. And I've told right-wingers this. I said that. I said to Augustus and Victus, I said, you guys are being used. You guys are you're paving the road to the very police state you guys say you oppose, right? And I said that. I have no problem saying that. I said that in a room full of Proud Boys. I said that, right? I said, you guys are being used. You're paving the road to the police state that you claim to oppose, right? I've said that, so there you go. Again, probably beat this point into the ground. Wow, we're going to be on here all night if I keep answering these questions this long. All right. How do you define luxury goods? Talk to an attorney about that. That's up to a lawyer, I believe. A lawyer will have to give you an answer to that. A good tax lawyer can probably tell you what is defined as a luxury good. All righty. U.S. president, does it have the authority to nationalize an industry? That's interesting. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Harry Truman tried to nationalize the steel mills at one point. There was a steel workers' strike during the Korean War, and I think he tried to nationalize the steel mills, and I think the Supreme Court may have told him he couldn't do it. That's really up it's up to the Supreme Court more than anything. There's eminent domain where the government has the right to seize property, but does the president have the right to nationalize an industry? The Supreme Court would have to intervene on that question. I would say so. I don't think there's any constitutional ban on it, right? But that the Supreme Court would probably disagree with me. Amy Coney Barrett and all of them would probably say no, but I don't think that it's unconstitutional for the president to nationalize industries. I don't think so. How could the USSR have prevented collapse? Well, okay, so the USSR, how could it have prevented collapse? Well, the thing is, right, it's not like there was a button they could have pushed, and it's like, oh, okay, we just got to push button C, and that, no, I mean, the problems of the Soviet Union were deeply entrenched. I think the main issue in Soviet society was it didn't have the ability to evolve. They needed to fix things. There were big problems in the Soviet Union in the 80s. They needed to fix them. They tried to fix them in a way that the system came apart, right? The Soviet Union could not bend, and so it broke. Chinese socialism, on the other hand, has constantly been able to adapt and change and evolve, right? And that has been the strength of Chinese socialism. It's just constantly adapting and changing and adjusting. Soviet Union, no. Soviet Union, their system became very solidified, and so they couldn't change. So I don't think it's like a choice they could have made. I think that it was a problem that developed in Soviet society. You have to remember, they went through 15 countries invading them. They went through World War II, 26 million deaths. They had big problems. Khrushchev came in and started taking things apart. Brezhnev came in and started trying to put things back together, but he was nowhere near as charismatic. And that energy that Stalin had, that had the 5-year plans, that energy was gone by that point. And then, Gorbachev came in and he tried to really fix things. And it was clear that he represented a wing of the Soviet Communist Party that was not revolutionary anymore, didn't really believe in communism anymore. There was a big chunk of the party that didn't believe in communism, and the whole thing came apart, right? And there were big problems. There was a problem that the population was depoliticized. The average person in the country was not engaged in the political process. The leaders of the party, a lot of them had secretly stopped believing in communism and were saying that they believed in communism in public because that was the rule, but secretly didn't believe it anymore. There were big problems, right? There were big problems. And, those problems culminated in the collapse. China has learned from those problems. President Xi Jinping, when he first came into office, required every member of the Chinese Communist Party to watch a documentary about the fall of the Soviet Union. So, all right, is the future of Russia good? I would say so. Look, Russia, they had a farming boom, right? They all of a sudden Russia has a farming, apparatus. They rebuilt their agriculture. That's amazing. They're heavily involved with China, and we talk about Vladivostok and the economic forums. I've been to Crimea. I have been to the Yalta Economic Forum. That is a room full of energy. There's a lot of businessmen and computer people and manufacturers and tech startups, and that because of what's happening in China, what's happening in Russia, what's happening with the Eurasian Economic Union, what's happening in the Far East, there is growth happening, right? The pandemic has obviously slowed things down for the moment, but there's growth happening in the East. The East is rising, right? Russia, China, Eurasia are the future, and they're moving ahead, right? The space program, amazing stuff, right? What they're doing with nuclear power, the fusion energy research, Putin has called for global cooperation around fusion energy. Yes, I think the future of Russia is good. I think it's very good. Now obviously oil, the oil markets and all of that is going to shake things up. But right now the world still needs oil, and Russia is an oil producing country. So we'll see what happens, right? There might be a few bumps along the road. Their economy is centered around energy at the moment. So there may be some bumps in the road coming up, but we'll see. I think the future of Russia is good, right? I think the future of Russia is very good. All right. Skippy the Bear said something, right? Who cares? Look, this is a person who is so stupid, that when I say to him what the difference between Malthusianism and Marxism is, when I tell him that what he's saying is Malthusianism and not Marxism, he can't even comprehend what I'm saying, okay? This is a person who intentionally mischaracterizes my position, says things like I don't know about the difference between the higher stage and the lower stage of communism. It says things like, Oh, there's some classics, right? Says, he takes Marx quotes out of context, like Marx quotes about the Paris Commune to mean Marx never advocated a state, which is not what that quote says. Look, this is a professional liar, right? This is a flim flam man, and it's like with all the subscribers he has, with all the things he could be making videos about, he wants to make videos lying about me. Think about that. Of all the things this guy could be doing, right? He could be, making videos about anything. He could be anything, right? Instead, he makes videos claiming that I'm secretly a white supremacist neo-Nazi who goes around murdering trans people or something, right? I mean, this is like something's off. Something's off. A lot of people say that the people that attack you, the people that criticize you, they're doing it for a reason, right? I mean, of all the reasons, look how many subscribers I have versus how many. Why? Of all the reasons has Skippy the Bear picked me to go after? It's a bit of a compliment, I think. I mean, the fact that somebody with that big of an audience, who's getting, with Patreon, is getting way more money than I'm ever getting from social media, has chosen to use his time to go after me. It says I'm pretty damn important. I'm pretty damn important. And the crazy thing is, everything this man has ever said about me, goes in one ear and out the other if you actually listen to me. If you actually listen to what I talk about, he falls apart immediately, right? He lies so extremely, so intensely, this man lies, that all people have to do is watch me, and then it's done, right? I mean, I had somebody the other day, they left a comment, they said, wow, thank goodness I actually listened to you and didn't just listen to what people said about you. Oh, well, there you go. And that's, you're all here. You're all my regular audience. You actually listen to me, so you like me, right? Well, he's trying his hardest to keep people from actually listening to me. It's not going to work, though. He's drawing attention to me. Ever since he attacked me, my views were through the roof. My book sales have been through the roof. And I didn't even know he'd attacked me. I don't listen to his content, right? I don't listen to his content, right? Way to look at women's sports. I don't listen to his content, but all of a sudden my views are going through the roof. I mean, all of a sudden I'm like, oh wow, I'm getting thousands more views lately. Oh, my books are selling more. What? Oh, I got attacked by Skippy the Bear. I didn't even know about it. So someone's asking me, like, he said something lately. I didn't know that. I'm just telling you, I didn't know it. I've blocked this guy on Twitter. I don't care, right? If someone is going to lie, they're not worth engaging with, If someone is going to tell the truth, you can engage with them, right? If they can say, look, I think you're wrong about this, but I'll talk to you, you can talk to them. When someone just lies, like he does, and he lies, just lies, right? You can't engage with them. But I appreciate the publicity, and in a way, it's a compliment of all the people he could go after, right? The internet is full of actual right-wingers he could go after, actual fascists, actual Nazis, actual transphobes. Instead, he decides to go after me, right? So I'm glad I'm that important. And, I cannot explain it. I do not know why he picked me. I don't know what could possibly make him think that I'm the main danger, that I'm the guy to go after. But hey, go for it. Go for it. Thanks, Ramiro. Got your back as well. All right. The Marxist-Leninist view of religion. Well, the Marxist-Leninist view of religion, if you're speaking strictly about what Marx and Lenin said, right, they are atheists, right? It's strict materialism. Right? Now, Marx did write a very good pamphlet, Lenin wrote a very good pamphlet called, the Workers' Party's Attitude Toward Religion, which is very good, and it criticized ultra-left elements for attacking religion, said it was not strategic to attack religion, which I thought was very, very good. And it's a very carefully written document about how Lenin argued that communists should relate to religion. But ultimately, strict ML, is atheist. I am not a strict ML. ML, Marxism-Leninism, is probably the biggest ideological influence on me, right? It's a big ideological influence on me. I've studied Lenin's work. I used to actually own Lenin's complete works, and I studied Lenin's work, up and backwards and forwards, and I was a member of an ML party for a long time, and I mean, I quote Marx and Lenin heavily, and ML is probably the biggest ideological influence on me, but it's not the only one, right? I mean, I've published my own edition of Gaddafi's Green Book, right? Gaddafi was not ML, right? I'm very heavily influenced by Bolivarianism, right? That's not ML. Bolivarianism is not ML, right? They're all Christians. Chavez was a Christian. Evo Morales was a Christian, right? The Nicaragua, the Sandinistas, that's a Christian government, right? And that they draw elements of ML, but they also draw elements of indigenous indigenous Latin American culture. They also have elements of Catholicism, and I'm influenced by Baathist Arab socialism. I've studied Michel Aflaq. I'm influenced by the Islamic Revolution of Iran. I've had the experience, which very few Americans have had, of being in the same room as the supreme leader of the Islamic Revolution of Iran. I have traveled around the world. I'm not a strict dogmatic ML. If you just adhere to strict dogmatic ML, you would have to be an atheist. But I don't do that. So I guess there you go. But Lenin had a very good pamphlet. What should the Workers' Party's attitude be toward religion? That's very good. That's the ML view, right? Because the ML view, people think ML is like spewing atheism all the time. Not exactly. There was a more nuanced view. All right, the Cleveland Indians are changing their name. Good. Yeah, I mean, that was offensive. They shouldn't have done that. I was in Cleveland. I will say that issues like that are not necessarily the best strategic issues to rally around, but it's offensive. I mean, Chief Wahoo, give me a break. I was a kid in Cleveland, or I was in Cleveland. I was a kid in, Northeast Ohio, and it was not okay, right? Look, that face that they had for the Cleveland Indians, if you made that face of any other race, that would be not okay, right? If you made a face like that for black people, you made a face like that for Latinos, it wouldn't be okay, right? And that Native American face, and look at the face there. That's a racist caricature. Shouldn't have been done. Should have been gotten rid of. Are you seriously going to have a football team called Redskins, right? We're kind of past talking about people's skin color, right? Yeah, not okay. Good that the Cleveland Indians are changing their name. About time, in my view. Yeah, it's about time. It's about time. Biggest misconceptions about the DPRK. Oh, I don't know. People need to view the DPRK as a group of people that are fighting to survive. And they've been under attack for decades. And they're fighting to survive. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions about the DPRK is that people portray them as if they are Korean supremacists, right? As if they are, there's a whole book, The Cleanest Race, and there's this whole effort to make it sound like they're a racial state. And I think there's even like fascists, like neo-Nazis, who like them on that basis. The DPRK has a very, very long record of solidarity with other races and other nationalities. The North Koreans, they were welcoming to the Black Panthers, and the Black Panthers had a special relationship with North Korea. North Korea, they sent support to the African people, various anti-colonial struggles in Africa. They built a monument for independence in Senegal. It was very amazing. They supported the Palestinians. They worked with Gaddafi. The record of internationalism from North Korea is miles and miles long. So, the notion that, and there are lots of Africans who live in North Korea, right? There are lots of, Palestinians who live in North Korea. There are many people who are not Korean ethnically who live in North Korea. So the notion that the Koreans are ethnic or racial supremacists, I don't even know what that means, Diggy, David, but whatever. All right. Or ethnic and racial supremacists, that is a big misconception. Why the Wall Street Journal over the Financial Times? I don't know. Financial Times is good too. It's out of London, right? Financial Times is a London-based press. It's pink. It's actually pink. And I've learned a lot from the Financial Times. There's good content in the Financial Times. Wall Street Journal is more directed at an American audience, and it's a little more unfiltered. But I've gotten a lot from the Financial Times. I do read the Financial Times pretty regularly. I'll buy it from the newsstands. It's worth reading. does the USA need to collapse first before going to socialism? No, it doesn't. In fact, I would argue that collapse would probably make going to socialism very difficult. Look, when a society collapses, it enters a state of chaos and barbarism. Socialism would be very hard to establish in a state of chaos and barbarism, right? A collapse of a society would mean, wars and chaos and people not having electricity and people not having running water and, just everything breaking down and falling apart. So a collapse would probably make going to socialism very difficult. Socialism should be implemented to prevent a collapse. And I would argue that socialism is probably the only thing that could really prevent a collapse in the United States right now. Capitalism is just leading us further and further to closer to collapse. So no, I would say the opposite. I think that societal collapse would make things far harder for socialists because we wouldn't have a country anymore, right? We would just have complete and utter chaos. Socialism is about bringing order. It's about bringing order to the economy, not chaos. All right, journalists I recommend. Manar Muhawish of Mint Press News is amazing. She is utterly amazing. She's great. Who else? Oh, wow. I mean, there's so many great independent journalists out there. I appreciate Glenn Greenwald's work. I don't agree with everything he's ever said, but I think he's pretty good. Wow. I mean, there's many great voices out there that I really enjoy. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question. Check out Manar Muhawish at Mint Press News. She's great. All right, Marxism and QAnon both considered to be Russian propaganda. Well, that's bizarre. I mean, I think that's what liberals do now. Anything they don't agree with is Russian propaganda, right? QAnon is this right-wing conspiracy theory about the government being run by pedophiles. That's QAnon. And Marxism is an ideology that comes from the teachings of Karl Marx. Neither of them are Russian propaganda. So, yeah. I mean, it's just kind of sad. If liberals don't like it, it's Russian propaganda. Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, Richard Medhurst is pretty good, too. All right. The history of Yugoslavia. Well, Yugoslavia, after World War II, during World War II, there was resistance to the Nazis among the Slavs, right? Tito and others, and it was established as a socialist country after World War II. And then in 1948, Tito cut ties with the Soviet Union, had a falling out with Stalin. They implemented more of a market socialist system. They had worker self-management where every factory was independent but sold its goods to the state. And this resulted in actually making their socialism less efficient. And I believe Yugoslavia remained, it was broken apart gradually. Michael Parenti has a very good book called To Kill a Nation on Yugoslavia, which is very, very good. And the USA was able to foment ethnic conflicts and break it apart piece by piece. But it was much harder to take apart than most of the socialist countries of Europe. So, Josip Broz Tito was the leader of Yugoslavia. There's one guy who was in Yugoslavia who became an anti-communist, guy named Gillis, and he, broke with Tito and became a raving anti-communist, and that was Gillis, and there was Tito, and there was a big faction of the Yugoslav Communist Party that was pro-Stalin. A lot of them were put in prison camps. But yeah, Yugoslavia, they set up the non-aligned movement. They were very big in setting up the non-aligned movement. Yeah, I mean, it's a socialist country. Albania did not like Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia did not like Albania. Yugoslavia, was the first socialist country to really turn against the rest of the socialist bloc. Supported the USA during the Korean War. So there you go. All righty. Tips on reading Capital. Well, look, Capital, I've read it. It is, I will say this, right, that there's a lot of prestige around reading Capital, right? It's got this I've read Capital. Look how thick Capital is. See, I've read it. I am so smart, right? There's a lot of get over that, right? That's a lot of, intellectual silliness, right? Capital's worth reading. The section of Capital that I found the most interesting is the section about primitive accumulation. It's fascinating when he talks about how capitalism came into existence with mass genocide, right? He talks about the clearing of the commons, the hanging of vagabonds, it's fascinating stuff, and colonialism and slavery paving the way to the birth of capitalism. that is amazing stuff. He talks about capitalism having a rosy dawn with slavery and such. I mean, that is utterly amazing stuff. He talks about the competition between workers and machines. That's very amazing as well. Some of it does get a little bit tedious. I mean, the commodity. What is a commodity? From hence does the commodity determine its value? He talks about the general law of capitalist accumulation, right? And how the capitalist is constantly looking to make more profits, to reinvest those profits, and how the capitalist enterprise is expanding and looking to expand. And I mean, it's how capitalism works. That's what it's about. It's about how capitalism works. All right, sex worker politics. Well, look, okay. The thing is, for the overwhelming majority of people in this world who are prostitutes or engage in sex for money, it's not liberating. It's slavery. And it's awful, and they get treated horrendously, and they get derated, and they're doing it either out of economic compulsion or out of direct compulsion. And that's a horror, and that must be ended, right? And human trafficking must be ended. Sex trafficking must be ended. Okay? Now, that's a little bit different than if somebody on their own wants to do that. That's different. Of their own free will, they choose to do it, not out of economic compulsion, no pimp involved threatening them. If they want to choose to do it of their own free will, that's a completely different thing. All right? That's a completely different thing. And I think that the issue is a little bit complicated because like I said, for the overwhelming majority of people involved in that kind of work, it is a horror. And that sometimes the pro-sex worker crowd glosses over that. They gloss over it. They pretend that that's not the case. They pretend that all prostitutes or sex workers have it as good as people who choose to do it voluntarily, and they ignore that experience, and they ignore what prostitution is for the majority of people in the world, what it means to people in the world. You can't go into working class communities and announce that you are in favor of sex work, right? If you make that a central issue, people are going to say, no, I've had that in my community. I've seen what that's about, and I don't want that, right? Now, that's different, though, than saying that people should be able to do it of their own free will, right? It's a personal freedom issue, number one. And that's also different than saying it should be decriminalized, right? And that's a big thing, right? I mean, does it ever help to jail a woman for being a prostitute? Does that ever help anything? Does she go, oh my goodness, I was going to be a prostitute, but then they threw me in jail and it turned my life around. So now I'm going to study chemistry at university and get my PhD. Thank you so much for locking me in jail for prostitution. Of course not, right? How does locking a woman in jail for being a prostitute ever help anything? It doesn't, right? Number one. Number two, right? If someone is doing that of their own free will and it is their choice, it's not my business. Not your business, right? Somebody of their own free will chooses to do that. It's not if they're being compelled to do it, if they're doing it because they're starving because they can't feed their kids, if the mafia is involved, if they're being trafficked, obviously. But if somebody of their own free will is doing it, that's their business. Not my business. Not your business, whatever. What people do with their bodies is their business, right? And that's kind of where we're at, right? But yeah, so the pimps, the criminal organizations, the reality of what sex work is for the majority of people involved in it needs to be smashed. But people should have the freedom to do it, and obviously punishing women who get involved in it, it doesn't help anything. Even if they are involved in a way where it is, involved in organized crime and all that, how does punishing them help? It doesn't, right? So, read the report about what the Vice Squad has been doing here in New York City. Not good, right? So, and my position here is nuanced, right? I'm recognizing the horror of what it is most of the time that it goes on. But I'm also recognizing that hypothetically, there are ways people could do it of their own free will, and they shouldn't be stopped from doing that. So it's a complex issue, but ultimately, when it gets down to it, right, this is my position, right, and that for the majority of women that have been involved in that, or men, right, boys, men, for the majority of people involved in that stuff, it's a horror. okay? And if you don't acknowledge that, you're not acknowledging reality. However, however, if hypothetically speaking it's not, if someone is just doing it as a way to feel empowered or whatever, that's their business, not mine, not my business. All right, that's my position. I've said it many times. Okie dokie. What will my synthetic left book be about? My synthetic left book will be about the synthetic left. Funny how that works, isn't it? No, I'm just kidding. No, I mean, the reason that it's taking so long is I just went over it again, and I realized that there's a lot of things I need to tell people, right? There's a lot of things I need to tell people. You can't assume that your audience knows anything. There's a lot of stories that need to be told, and I have a stack of books I've ordered for background research, and it's just getting bigger every day. I'm going to have to figure out how to make it good and concise. So there you go. All right. It's got a lot of stuff in it. All right. Modern Communist Party USA. Great group. I know a lot of great people that are in the Communist Party. I think some of them are watching right now, and good for them. You know, I mean, I meet a lot of great people in the Communist Party. A lot of great people. I don't agree with them that Biden was the lesser of two evils in the last election. I was not sure he was the lesser of two evils. Trump was pretty bad, but I'm not sure Biden was better. But that's I understand why they take that position, right? They're tied to organized labor, and Biden was definitely friendlier to labor, right? And I mean, so I mean, I understand why the Communist Party took the position it took. And I respect that position, and a lot of strong arguments for immigrant communities, and a lot of strong arguments could be made that Biden was the lesser of two evils. But I saw and heard a lot of very strong arguments that he wasn't. So based on that, I didn't agree with them. But the Communist Party is full of great people, right? I mean, and so many of the best people I have met ended up joining the Communist Party. Like I met them, and then they said, you know what, I'm going to join the Communist Party. That's great. So I'm not hostile to the Communist Party. I've been to their office. I've been to a few events at their headquarters. They seem like nice people. I've never been a member of the Communist Party. I think when I was like 15, I filled out a form on the internet, and they sent me like a magazine or something, but I was never really a member. I know that they've gone through a lot of changes over the last few years. They're kind of changing the way they operate, and I hope that that something good that does a lot of good work for the country, can emerge, and I hope that they can get a lot of good work done in popularizing socialism and all of that. Yeah. So and there's a lot of different views. I see somebody in the chat now is saying they're a member and they don't agree, and that's great. I'm glad there's difference of opinion in the Communist Party. That's great. UFO files. I don't know. I mean, a UFO is an unidentified flying object. And if there is an object that is flying that is unidentified, it is a UFO. When you hear UFO, you're supposed to think aliens. You're supposed to think like do, Twilight Zone, X-Files, whatever. Well, I mean, UFO is an unidentified flying object. Are there objects that are flying that are unidentified? Yeah, I'm sure, right? So what? I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's just, I'm not into, there's this whole subculture and universe of people that are into all of that. I'm not my cup of tea. But, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. There's various theories. What was really happening at Area 51 and all that. Not my cup of tea. I stay away from it. There was a book a couple of years ago that came out that was claiming that the little green men were actually, midgets that Stalin had put on a flying, I don't know, they blamed it on Stalin. Look that book up. There's a whole book saying that UFOs and Martians and flying saucers and little green men were all by Stalin. And that's hilarious. I think that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But folks, that Stalin, is responsible for all evil things in the world. Well, it turns out Stalin created little green men and Martians, right? You can't make this up. There was a book. It was being promoted. Like The Daily Show, Jon Stewart promoted it. It was everywhere. The little green men, Area 51 was all an evil plot from Joseph Stalin. And it was in the bookstores and everything. You could get it, right? This is how dumb anti-communism gets. That's how dumb anti-communism gets. Go look. It was in Barnes and Noble, at Borders. You could buy this book that was pushed by a major publisher, all about how Stalin was the man who created the UFO scare. It was evil Stalin sent UFOs. I kid you not. Like, this is how dumb things get, right? I know. I mean, I don't really know anything about the whole UFO universe. I really don't. I haven't looked into it. I will say that there was a bluegrass song that came out. I think in 1947, and it was a gospel bluegrass song. And it was like, you better pray to the Lord when you see them flying saucers. You can look it up. And what's interesting is that, the song, I mean, it never says they're aliens or anything. The song, it's hinting that, like, Armageddon is coming. And you have to wonder if, like, the whole UFO thing, and the fact that after World War II and, like, the 50s, there's all those disaster movies, or, like, so many movies about, like, Godzilla destroying a city, or a giant moth destroying a city, or a giant spider destroying a city, and then there's, like, all these UFO sightings, and, you have to wonder, it was like the trauma of World War II, right? I mean, the Great Depression, people were starving, and then you had World War II, in which millions of people died, this catastrophic war, and out of that, the United States suddenly emerges. It's once again the center of the world's economy. And you have, white picket fence in the suburbs. But, if people have been through that much trauma and that much pain, they're not going to accept that they're safe. They're not going to go, oh, I'm safe now. Okay, great. I just went through this horrendous war. I just went through this economic depression. But you know what? Everything is just swell. Everything's okay. It's not okay. People are going to be shaken up. People are going to be watching their back. People are going to carry that trauma and that pain with them. I mean, a lot of people talk about, my grandparents lived through the Depression. They died when I was in high school, but on both sides, my grandparents lived through the Depression, and, a lot of people would tell stories about their family members who lived through the Depression. Like the story that I've often heard is a lot of people, their grandfather carried $500 with him in his wallet at all times and never spent it, and just carried it with him just so he knew that he'd be safe, because he knew what it was like to be hungry and starved. Well, that's trauma, right? That's not normal behavior. Most people don't carry $500 in their wallet with them at all times just so they can look at it if they get worried, right? But apparently, it was very common for old folks who lived through the Depression to have $500 in their wallet. They could just touch it and they know, I'm safe. I've got $500. I'm going to be okay. Right? Not trusting the banks, right? Old people have a lot of money in their mattress, right? They stuff their mattress full of money, not trusting the banks because they remember going to the bank and it was empty during the Great Depression. That happened, So part of me thinks that maybe the whole flying saucer scare, that was 1947, is 1947, right after World War II. It's the trauma. The trauma of all of that. They had been through world catastrophic events, and it was very, very hard to just accept that coming out of all of this depression and starvation and war, that they were safe. And so, there was another catastrophe right around the corner. That's what a lot of people do. A lot of people have had a very insecure life. They get a secure life, and they can't accept it. And I think McCarthyism, as it got crazy and out of control, in a lot of ways, McCarthyism became that, right? It was one thing when the ruling class was whipping up this hysteria, but it's like, this population had just been all through all these catastrophes. These towns would have, like, rehearsals for when the Soviet Union invaded, and they would, like, pretend, it was crazy, right? It's like, well, they had to be getting ready for a big war and catastrophe because they'd just been through that, and that's what they were used to. They couldn't accept that things were kind of peaceful. A lot of the hippie generation, right? The hippies, they're all just like, tune out, man, calm down. Well, a lot of that was their parents were people who had been through a war and a depression and were kind of, uptight and panicky and looking over their shoulder all the time. And their kids are like, let's chill out, man, let's chill out. Well, it was a generational divide. Their kids had grown up in the 1950s and splendor, and their parents had not, and there was kind of a generational divide. And the hippies are like, chill out, man. Right? Well, it makes sense, right? Their parents are like that, because, if you grew up in a household with parents that have been through tumultuous chaos, but yet you're living in a very stable U.S. economy. 1950s, 1960s, the USA had the best economy in the world, highest standard of living. Doesn't have that anymore, but it did back then. at that point, you're going to have a very different mindset. So I think the UFO thing, I put it in the context of all of that, right? When I listened to that country song from 1947, the bluegrass song about, pray to the Lord when you see, I think the last verse of the song, the lyrics are, though the war may be through, there's rest and trouble brewing. Those flying saucers may be just a sign that if peace doesn't come, it will be the end of some. So repent today, you're running out of time. Right? I mean, it's just, the song is like, the apocalypse is coming, right? Well, the apocalypse wasn't coming in 1947, but you can understand why people might think that, right? If they'd been through all of that and then the world just suddenly is calming down, we're entering this Cold War period where, there you go. I mean, I can put the UFO fears and the UFO panic into a category of the trauma of post-World War II. It's very much a 1950s thing. It's very much a 1950s thing. I mean, it became a big thing. I mean, it's still a big thing, right? There's still people all over the internet talking about that stuff. When I was living in Cleveland, there was somebody I was a political activist with, and her brother was really into the UFO thing. And he would visit them around the holiday time. He would drive to Cleveland and visit them. And he had all these DVDs about UFO stuff. And, he was really into it. And, I was just hanging out. I was a college kid. And so I'd be over at this person's house. And their brother would be there. And he'd have drove in from wherever the hell he lived. And we'd be staying with her for the holidays. And be like, oh, you got to watch these UFO DVDs with me, Caleb. And I'd be like, okay, fine, whatever, right? We're sitting there, we'd eat some pizza and watch the UFO DVDs. And I don't know if any of that stuff's true. I don't care. It's mildly interesting. It's not my universe, I don't really care. And afterwards, everyone was like, oh, you're so nice. You sat there with that guy and watched those UFO DVDs. I'm like, I don't care. Whatever. He's into UFOs. Okay. I was looking for a place to hang out on Saturday night, and we ate some pizza, and he's a nice guy. He's a genuinely nice guy. He's into UFOs. He's been buying all these UFO DVDs. He wants to show me his UFO DVD. I don't care. I'm generally a tolerant kind of guy. You know what I mean? I have things, as you all know, that I'm intensely interested in, like politics. This guy was intensely interested in UFOs, so we sat there in the living room of my friend, and we watched his UFO DVDs, right? I never became like red-pilled to the UFO universe. I just, it wasn't my cup of tea, right? It didn't seem all that convincing to me. It seemed a little strange, but, to each their own, right? People are allowed to have obscure interests, right? People are allowed to be, people are allowed to have their little corner of the world, right? I'm not a vegan. I'm not a vegetarian, but I don't think people should be stigmatized for that, right? I had a good friend in college who was a vegan, right? I generally have the attitude that people have the right to be themselves. So, while I'm not part of the UFO world, right, I don't feel like we should mock them. I don't feel like, if that's what people want to be into, right, whatever. Okay. International Longshore Warehouse Union, ILWU. You remember 1934. 1934, you had it was the summer of 1934. It was like the turning point of organized labor, right? That was the summer of the Teamsters strike in Minneapolis. That was the summer of the Auto Light strike in Toledo, Ohio. That was also the summer that in San Francisco, the dock workers went on strike. In San Francisco, in the docks of San Francisco, it was very nepotistic, the hiring practices. The workers were treated very badly. And they had this union that was awful called the ILA, the International Longshore Association. So the Communist Party decided to, basically start their own union. And they formed their own union. They didn't invite any of the labor leaders. They had a meeting with just the rank and file workers. And usually when the dock workers would go on strike, the black community would be the scab labor. But the Communist Party had a very good relationship with the black community. So they made a deal with the black community that part of the demand of the strike would be that black workers would be hired on the docks. The docks were whites only back then. The Communist Party made a deal with the black community and with black churches and the NAACP that if there was a strike, the black community would not be scab labor, and they would not be scab labor, and then the labor union, if they won the strike, would give jobs to black people. So there was a strike on the docks, and they shut the docks down, and it caused a huge problem in the U.S. economy because a lot of things are imported over ships through San Francisco, and it was a big strike, and workers were killed, and they were I mean, it was a big moment, and they won, right? And the Communist Party, they did it. They were the leaders of it. Samuel Darcy, not Sam Marcy. That's a different. It rhymes, but it's a different name. Samuel Darcy, Sam Darcy, who was a leader of the Communist Party in San Francisco. Harry Bridges, who it's not clear if he was ever a member of the Communist Party, but he was like a friend of theirs. There's a few other names that are associated with it. They led this very, very massive labor struggle in San Francisco to unionize the docks. And they won 1934. And then they established the ILWU, the International Longshore Warehouse Union. They combined the warehouse workers with the longshore workers, the ILWU. And it's still around, and it's a very left-wing union. It's very socialist, very revolutionary. They've done great stuff. They refused to unload ships from South Africa to protest apartheid. They shut the docks down at one point to protest the war in Iraq. They're a very revolutionary labor union. They're great. They're one of the most militant, fighting labor unions in the country. They're very progressive. ILWU. Yeah, they're in San Francisco. Yeah, they're good stuff. Yeah, Mike Quinn's book on the San Francisco strike is very excellent. It's called The Big Strike. Very good. Alrighty, was John Brown a left adventurist? Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I think that in the context of the moment, right, there were slave revolts happening all throughout the South. And there was a mass abolitionist movement in the United States. And I think he made a miscalculation. I think John Brown was convinced that if he did what he did at Harper's Ferry, that would be a way that these revolts of people that were enslaved could be unified. I think it was a miscalculation. I mean, it didn't work, right? I mean, it didn't work. Wasn't successful. I mean, I wouldn't put it in the same category as someone who does something crazy and violent. I would say that, I think it was, it was an attempt to try and organize a mass uprising against slavery. Now, it was not successful, so obviously, it failed. But that doesn't mean it wasn't noble, right? I mean, they tried to do something very good. And there was a mass base for what they were doing. And on top of that, slavery is a situation where slaves are not allowed to peacefully organize. They're not, right? Slaves cannot peacefully organize, right? And in a lot of the South, you couldn't even, as a white person, organize abolition, legally. You couldn't. So I wouldn't condemn John Brown for what he did. Abraham Lincoln called him a fanatic. But a lot of the progressives in the North really supported him. I think, what is it? Emerson really supported him, and Henry David Thoreau really supported him. And no, I mean, I think that John Brown, there was a mass base of support for what he did, and that's why, like, the whole army had to come, surround the execution of John Brown. They had to bring the whole army there because they were afraid people were going to rescue him. Right? So, I don't think that, I don't think you can put what John Brown did to try and end slavery, right? He was trying to seize Harper's Ferry so he could, use it as a base to stage a mass revolt against slavery. There were already, there was the slave revolt of Nat Turner had already happened, and there were slave revolts happening all throughout the South at that time. So, and slaves, their right to peacefully organize didn't exist. It was already an armed conflict, and John Brown had been fighting an armed battle in Kansas. You have to remember the Bleeding Kansas period. I think I think what John Brown did was justified. I think it was a miscalculation, though. It didn't work, right? It didn't work, right? Obviously, if you're going to go out and fight, you got to win, right? And it didn't work. But at the same time, I don't think there was anything. I don't think it was wrong to try and do what John Brown did in that context, when you have millions of people that are slaves, and those slaves are rising up and trying to break free, when the right of people to peacefully organize is being suppressed. You know, I mean, when there's armed battles in Kansas over whether it's going to be a slave state or a free state, in the context of an armed struggle that's already brewing, when there's already an armed struggle going on, when people are deprived of their basic human rights, I don't think that what John Brown did at Harper's Ferry was wrong. It didn't work, though. You want to win if you do something like that, and he didn't win. Um, Thoughts on the CARES Act and it being the largest transfer of wealth in history? I don't know what that is. I actually don't know what that is. I don't know what the CARES Act is. I do not know what the CARES Act is, so I cannot answer that question. But yeah, folks, it's late. I have work in the morning. This is kind of a weird live. I'm in kind of a weird place. I'm a little scattered tonight. So next time I do my live, I'm going to be a little more precise. I'm going to have precise points. But, hey, why not just get on here and chat with my community? This has been an informal live. And this has been an informal chat, and I always enjoy talking to you all, right? I try to get on here and just engage with you all. You all are a lovely community. So, yeah, I think it's great. I'm glad we can hang out and chill. It's been a fun evening. Thank you all. And there you go. So, on that note, folks, I will end the way I always end. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Remember, folks, we need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Good night.